Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto hid his identity while protecting the Moon Witch Hinata? Naruto x Hinata Part 3. Then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. 2 weeks had passed, and yet, you look so much on the edge of your seat, Hinata, that I'm inclined to think you will eventually fall off of it. Everything was almost entirely the same. The bar, even with its freshly painted walls and polished furniture, still attracted the most uncanny of people. Shadowy, shifting sort, as well as the kind who loved to stir trouble wherever they went. Tsunade was, per usual, neck-deep in men who came to flirt or get a reaction, rarely for only a drink. Jiraiya or Kakashi's presence rarely scared them off, nor would Tsunade wish for them to. And though she's told her it was because she did not need men to fix her troubles, Hinata was sure Tsunade secretly loved the attention. Thrived in it, really. A practice Hinata could only wish to one day master. But like the forever excitement in the bar, Hinata stayed in corners, quietly watching and waiting. And to her side, well, Suigetsu, unsurprisingly, was there. Unchanged, of course, because nothing could easily change such a stubborn man. Moon, Hinata nearly hissed under her breath as her gaze skittered along the room, hoping no one overheard him. To her relief, not a soul seemed to have heard, but her shoulders did not relax from their stressed arches as she turned to him, frowning. Call me that in public, please. I don't want anyone. Oh, come on. They're too far in their booze to hear me. He smirked and nodded his chin to a gaggle of women by the bar, snorting to themselves over some inside joke as they waved their champagne glasses around. Nor will they even remember it if they happen to overhear something. His purple eyes slid back to her, a sort of candlelight glow catching the violets around his pupils, causing him to look absolutely mischievous. Hinata was more than used to the look by then. You're still doing it. Blinking, Hinata looked down at herself. He was right. She was sitting on the edge of her seat, hands knitted to her lap, knuckles pale and protruded. She had to consciously relax herself as her back slid against her chair, putting room between herself and the table. Sighing, Hinata gave a sheepish smile. I'm sorry. Suigetsu's shoulders shook as he laughed, the sort that came from deep within the chest. A genuine one. Hinata has also been acquainted with such a laugh from him over the passing weeks. He was a stubborn, arrogant man, but he had bouts of genuineness, she's found. More than he liked to let on. Paying for her coffee on occasion, escorting her to her door at the end of the day, securing her cloak to her when buffs of wind or air blew it back, Hinata noticed it all. And while he always had an excuse, a quick snip, to add to every kind deed, Hinata knew well where the true purpose lied. Though, of course, she's kept it to herself, her observations. No need to embarrass him. What could possibly have you so on edge? Feet planted on one of the legs of the table, he pushed his chair to tip back and balance on its back legs. He looked relaxed, carefree. But Hinata knew by the tilt of his head that he was simply getting a better look at some of the people who frequented the bar. Who? She wasn't totally sure, but someone must have caught his eye. But that smirk of his never vanished, especially as he mused, shall I take a guess? Her heart pattered against her ribcage, and Hinata quickly took a sip from her water glass. Suigetsu. You're waiting for someone, aren't you? The chair sat back on all fours, and he faced her. An air of expectancy hovered around his cunning features. And at that moment, Hinata was reminded of another revolution she had made in their days spent together. Suigetsu was smart, observant, when he so wished to be. She had supposed it came with the job. The guard did not hire morons. Not that she was aware, at least. And just then, he had read her like a book. It made her feel like she was on the other side of the table, stickered face revealed to him in all its dour glory. Shifting, Hoping to hide her blush with the bow of her chin, Hinata said, I'm always waiting, Suigetsu. For a particular someone, he continued. Hinata stared at him. He grinned, and his teeth winked at her in the orange light. And I have a guess. But despite his moments of random kindness and keen observation, Suigetsu was a man of entertainment. A man who craved it, who ate it up like he's been starved for months. And his greatest pleasure was to find anything and all to tease her about. Mouth suddenly dry and sandy, Hinata nearly choked. Gulping down half of her water, she busied herself with flattening the folds of her lap to keep from meeting his eye. I don't. Sasuke. Right. Sasuke. That was a name she hadn't heard in a while. She hadn't seen him since the events that transpired at the guard. After that day, when she had cut him, he hadn't come back. Not that he had a reason to. Suigetsu was her bodyguard now, and she certainly did not need to. But still, Hinata often had the mind to wonder if he was avoiding her. Not that she would ever blame him, were it true. She had embarrassed him, broken his pride, and probably left him with a scar on his face. That, and as he had made perfectly clear, the bar was not a place he enjoyed. And it would be a lie to say that Hinata never wanted to see him again. His face was still a mess of weeds, and she wished he'd just let her help him. But to say she was waiting for him, well, her pause must have confirmed something for Suigetsu, for he grinned triumphantly and returned to lean back in his chair. I don't blame you. Women absolutely flocked to him. With the roll of his eyes, he clicked his tongue. Lucky bastard. Hinata laughed. For though Suigetsu talked long about many things, it was never about women. Yes, of course. I'm absolutely dying to see him. Fluttering her eyes, she took another sip of her water and smiled against the rim. He is, after all, the most handsome man I've ever laid my eyes upon. Second most handsome. Hinata locked eyes with him, and laughed. I suppose you're right. I always am. His gaze lingered over her shoulder, then fell back onto her. But not about Sasuke. He was awfully nosy today, wasn't he? She wasn't sure what he was trying to get at. That's a shame. 2 weeks ago, you made him go so red, I was expecting him to just explode or something. Red? Had he really? She hadn't noticed. Couldn't, really. Not with the mass of stickers on his face. Oh dear, had I really upset him that much? Not that I really care, he mentioned, waving a hand casually her way. It's refreshing to meet a woman who ain't totally mad for him. And though he tried to keep the atmosphere carefree, Hinata witnessed a narrow of his eyes and the flutter of the stickers at his gills. Rarely did he just let her see him pondering. This, she was not used to. But then, who is it? This someone. Doves filled her belly. A lightness beyond anything else warmed her from the inside, and when she closed her eyes, she found blue eyes staring back. She felt arms around her back. She felt a hand grip her fingers. And that laugh, oh, gods, that laugh, the kind that could make stickers vanish, was always in her head. Ringing, coaxing. But like Sasuke, he hadn't come by in 2 weeks. Hinata knew how he was. He probably had masses of the things on his face. The amount of stress he was putting himself through daily, and not able to talk to anyone about it, it worried her. That, she tried to tell herself, was the reason for her anxiety. For her antsy need to see him again. But she knew that was a lie. And like her cousin, both figmented and not, has told her millions of times, she could never lie well. Especially not to herself. Hinata. The sing-song of her name whispered in her ear made her jump, and when she snapped towards Suigetsu, she was met with that wide, obnoxious grin of his. The kind that fit him better than any perplexed look ever could. But that was something Hinata would have to also keep quiet. Not in public, Suigetsu. Right, he mused, of course. He stretched his arms behind his head. Guppy. Wait, Lady Hinata. Pausing on the ocean surface, waves licking at her ankles, Hinata sparred a second to glance at her cousin before turning to Suigetsu, who waited with her on the surface, a hand on his with an impatient tap to his index finger. Go ahead, she whispered. I need a moment. He stared at her for a moment, a brow raised, as if to wonder if she was actually asking him to leave. But with a smirk and a snort, he rolled his shoulders before diving into the murky waters. Knowing he would have to stay close, Hinata made sure to keep her voice low as she asked, What is it, Neji? She felt silly, staying behind to talk to her own imagination. But usually, this was how her subconscious was trying to tell her something, and it would be foolish to ignore it. Turning back to him, she found him staring at the sunset, face a bit pink in the red light. They had to leave the bar early that day. Not only was it packed, but Suigetsu seemed to be in a rush to get her out of there. Whoever he had seen that made him suspicious that day must have done something particularly disturbing to get under his skin and cause him to flee, though he didn't mention a thing to her. Nor did she ask, as she had a sort of tickling feeling in the back of her head telling her it wasn't her right to know. But it was, wasn't it? This was her safety they were talking about. I have a feeling tomorrow will be different, Neji said. Something will happen. Hinata's brows furrowed with confusion. Why do you think that? The wind picked up, throwing hair in her face, but Neji's image was not affected whatsoever. He merely frowned, as if displeased, and turned to her. There was someone in the bar. Someone you've met before. There was. She hadn't noticed anyone of that sort. No one looked familiar. They were looking for you. Gulping, Hinata nodded. To capture me, kill me, or, her voice lowered, help me. Neji folded his arms and turned back to the sinking, red sun. The wind dried her eyes and made them water up, and as she wiped at them, she saw a smirk curl upon her cousin's lips. Now isn't that the question? Her imagination had been right. The next day was entirely different. Because when she woke up to knocking, it wasn't the loud, obnoxious kind that Suigetsu often did. It was slow, precise. And when she found him at the door, his trademark smirk was strained as he pulled her boots from the shoe shelf. I'm taking you to the guard. Someone's there to see you. He gave her a narrow, puzzled peer. Personally, Hinata had been quick to get ready, not even preparing breakfast for the two of them. The seriousness in his face was enough to make her lose her appetite, and based on his lack of complaining on the way to the portal, he felt the same way. Surprisingly, the atmosphere in the guard building was not a tense kind. Nor was it any other kind Hinata expected. Instead, a rather exciting static was in the air. She's never seen so many smiling men and women before as she walked down the hallways, following the straight curve of Suigetsu's back. There was whispering, and many eyes trailed her as she journeyed to her destination. It all left her confused and a bit dizzy. Suigetsu had been so serious, still was, actually. If it was severe enough to get him to act such a way, surely something had happened. And, maybe, something did happen. But then why was the air at the guard so light when Suigetsu seemed so dour? Hinata nearly had the mind to ask, but by the time she gathered enough courage to ask him, they had arrived at a door, and she watched his entire person change. Grinning, sparkling eyes, relaxed shoulders, all a facade that he practiced well. And when he opened into that room, he became Suigetsu. Karen, what made you call us over so early? I need my damn beauty sleep. The arrogant, crude bastard Suigetsu, of course. It's past 10, you lazy clod. Came the expected shrill of Karen. Hinata followed Suigetsu into the room and found the red head by a massive bookshelf along the right wall. In her hand was a thick, old book, flipped to a page near the back, but Karen snapped it shut as soon as the door closed behind them. Past 10, meaning you're late. Didn't I tell ya to not be late for this one? TCH. Well, if I'm being honest, To say I was eager to get here would be a in. Suigetsu. Karen snapped, pulling off her specs to glare at him. I'd suggest you watch your language while in the presence of hell. Or all you guards like this. A third voice, stern and feminine, came from the other side of the room. Hinata had to step around Suigetsu to get a look. There, sat at a chair in front of a mahogany desk, was a woman. Blonde, tan, boiling. Her legs were crossed, manicured nails tapping on her arched knee, and there was a noticeable crease between her slanted brows. She was cloakless, shoulders left bare to soak up the candlelight, and her feet were barely covered. She must be from the Sand Realms. Hinata winced, an ebbing pain lapping at the back of her skull. From behind, Neji wafted into existence, head tipped, as if looking for something in particular. Suigetsu and Karen fell into a stiff silence, oddly out of character for them. But Hinata didn't bother to question it. She was too caught up in the turquoise nail polish, which matched perfectly with the glaring eyes set on her. You sure are a hard one to find, Hinata Hyuga. Panic ran its course, but a glance from Neji reminded her of his prior statement, about her meeting someone from the past. But, how did he know this would happen? You've been a thorn in my side for months. But, well, I suppose that's not the problem now, is it? Unsure of what to say, Hinata only bowed her chin. Somehow, that seemed to be the wrong thing to do, for the woman huffed and stood, marching over to her and grabbing her jaw to lift her head up. I shouldn't have to remind you that I hate it when you do that. Smoldering eyes. That's what she had. They were absolutely ablaze. Perfect for someone who lived in such a place like sand. But after a while of smolder and silence, they cooled down, and those tight lips curled downwards. Do I? A fumbling atmosphere came soon after that curious question. Suigetsu grabbed the woman's wrist and pulled her away, giving Hinata enough room to breathe. He looked ready to say something, but Karen, probably for the better, beat him to it. She's lost her memory, Ambassador. The blonde sneered. Don't play with me. Her head snapped back to her, eyes still lacking that fire that once engulfed the entire room. Am I really that forgettable, Hinata? You wound me with this game. And, weirdly enough, she laughed. A bit bitterly, but it was still a laugh as she shook her head and placed a hand on her. I get it. You were always distracted back then, of course you were. But let's get serious here. I really have been looking for you. With every word, more guilt and confusion settled on Hinata's chest. She hoped this wouldn't become a theme, people from her past coming back, expecting something from her that she couldn't give. It hurt to know she was disappointing them. Very sorry, Ambassador, but I really have lost my memory. The air went still. Not to a freezing degree, the opposite, actually. You are from Sand, correct? I don't remember ever visiting there. But I've heard it's lovely. Of course it's. Hinata. The woman stopped, mouth opening and closing, as if forgetting how to breathe. Karen and Suigetsu shared a look, and then Karen turned to pull out another chair. Let's sit and discuss why you're here, Tamari. Tamari. That. Another dagger of pain lodged its way in her skull, and Hinata quickly collapsed on the offered chair, clutching her head. Suigetsu, watching her, looking unpleased and pissed, stayed quiet and hovered at her side. Her cousin, however, stayed next to the woman, Tamari, as she sat herself down with equal inelegance, forehead pressed against her palm. He weaved past her, through the chair, to stand behind her. And after that, he stared. Tell her everything, Lady Hinata. She shook her head. What could that possibly mean? What was everything? Even she didn't know. What is happening here? Karen, having situated herself in her own chair behind the desk, slid a folder towards Tamari, who took it without hesitation, before folding her hands together. That's all the information the guard has gathered on her. Research. Records. Reports from the guards who've worked with her. It's barely anything, Tamari said, skimming through a page or two before slapping the papers against her lap. Naruto said nothing to me about this. That name sent Hinata reeling. She also knows Naruto. His grace has his own duties to attend. Shove it up my ass, will you? Tamari crossed her arms, cheeks faintly flushed with rage. My brother has his neck on the line. I don't have time to hear your excuses for this absolute apeshit I'm hearing. Standing once again, Tamari circled around the chair, rubbing at her temples. What am I doing? I shouldn't be here. You know these idiots can't help you. Unable to keep his mouth shut any longer, Suigetsu snorted and popped his knuckles. Just leave, already. We have better things to do than listen to your temper tantrum. Electricity was in the air, and Hinata had to look around the room to remind herself that Sasuke wasn't anywhere to be found. Temari's beautiful nails sunk into the back of the cushioned chair as she stared Suigetsu down, who stared back with vigor. Hinata sunk back in her seat and focused on her cousin, whose peeved expression took up her entire world as he glided back to her. Stop this before it gets out of hand, he demanded. She obviously came for something. For the love of the gods, Karen slammed her fist on the desk and stood, as well. Can you learn to keep your trap shut for 5 seconds? What the hell? She's in your office, Karen, talking shit about you. About us. Fingers flexing along with the rhythm of his gills, Suigetsu got in that pose Hinata knew all too well. He was getting ready to strike or defend, she wasn't sure, though her money was on the first. Neji's glare hardened. Lady Hinata. This was obviously a mistake, Tamari said, making her way to the door. I've lived all my life without anyone's help, and I ain't about to stop now. Especially not for your lousy excuse of a wait. Hinata nearly jumped out of her chair at the sight of the stickers on the back of Temari's neck, so obvious in there that she wasn't sure how she had missed them in the first place. Neji was right. She had come for something, for her. And if she had really spent months looking for her, then it would be a shame to let her leave so quickly. And, even if Hinata didn't exactly remember her, there was history between them. It was only fair to help. And Hinata was never the kind to turn away from someone in need of her help. I don't know you at all, she said, walking over, hoping to catch Temari's attention before she made her mind up for good. Or rather, I don't remember anything about you. But you needed me for a reason, and I'm willing to help. Just tell me what you need, and I'll try. Hinata, Suigetsu said, almost whined, just let her go. It's not worth it. Your brother needs my help, correct? Temari's shoulder flinched, and she turned to look down at her. When they had known each other in the past, had Hinata felt the same intimidation by her height alone? He doesn't need anything from you, she hissed. Somehow, that made them both wince, and her shoulders sloped. But, if you're offering help, we'll take it. Peeking over her shoulder, Hinata looked to her cousin first, who had himself planted between the two chairs, as if connecting them together, somehow. Inviting them to come back. He gestured her over, the look on his face telling her she was making the right decision. But the look on Suigetsu's face reminded her of the one Sasuke had with Tamaki. The disappointed, almost baffled kind. Disappointed at her stubbornness to help, baffled at her inability to sniff out the obvious trouble brewing in Tamaki's eyes. It made her feel oblivious, naive, like she was walking into another trap without even knowing it. Was she? But they were in the middle of the guard. Tamari had personally asked for her. And she had almost walked away without much of a fight. Surely, this was different from Tamaki. Smiling, Hinata followed her imagination's order and sat at her chair before turning back to the ambassador. Explain everything to me. A few months ago, my brother went mute. The black stickers danced along the back of her neck as Tamari weaved her fingers through her hair, tightening her buns with trained fingers. Hinata saw that first. Afterwards, she saw the unconditioned worry sunk in the lines on her face. He can't speak. Our finest doctors have no idea what the problem is, nor can they find a solution for it. Communication has been difficult. Kankuro and I have had to take up some of his duties. It's not easy to run an entire realm without words. Buzzing filled Hinata's mind as she stitched pieces of information together. She couldn't possibly mean, but of course she did. Ambassadors lived in San Juan, and if her brother had important duties to attend to, that could only mean. Oh gods. He was Gaara, the Hades, the devil, and despite Hinata knowing nothing of Tamari, flashback upon flashback of such a cold, ferocious man struck her immediately. He was an infamous king. Cruel to his subjects, to his council, to his own family. He was nicknamed the devil for his own apathy towards anyone but himself, and with that, a new name came to San Juan. Hell. No wonder Hinata never visited the place. But, somehow, she had memories of the man. Of blood covering his face. Of his stone eyes that could kill you if you looked at him for too long. Of something windy and twisty moving at his every whim, smelling of that of death. And, Tamari wanted her to help him. But that's not the only problem, she continued, serious tone snapping Hinata out of her alarming thoughts. Every year, a horrible sandstorm hits San Juan. Lasts for 3 days, and you can't leave the place without fear of being blown away or buried alive. Around the same time is when assassins and hitmen become the most. They sneak into the castle the day before, and once the sandstorm hits, there is nowhere for Gaara to run. The sun is blocked, we have limited men and sources, it's the perfect chance to kill him. And despite the tan glow of her skin, when Tamari reached over to touch Hinata's arm, her hands were pale and cold. Shaking. The storm hits in 3 days. If something happens to my brother, he won't have the voice to call for help. Despite herself, that overwhelmingly empathetic part melted as Hinata heard those words. But that quickly conflicted with the terrifying images still playing in her head. Okay, sure, Suigetsu piped up, sitting on the left arm of Hinata's chair with his arms crossed over his chest. Say that is the case. He hasn't been killed yet. Who says he'll be killed now? Karen shot him a warning look, but both he and Tamari ignored it. There's been many close calls in the past. Having a way to communicate that he's in trouble has been the saving blessing on my brother's life. And, unsurprisingly, Suigetsu didn't back down. Then just leave before the storm hits. It ain't that deep. Kings cannot just leave for 3 days, Tamari snapped, jaw clenching. And even if it were the case, my brother has made it abundantly clear he does not wish to leave San Juan behind. He's always been a loyal man. Suigetsu rolled his eyes and laughed. Loyal enough to die for it. Tamari's eyes slid on Hinata. Frankly, guard, I would expect you to understand the sentiment. Karen cut in before he could say another word, which, by the peeved look on his face, would be a very colorful word, to say the least. We all do, she said, don't we, Suigetsu? They locked eyes, and after a tense moment, he rolled his shoulders and huffed. If I may, Ambassador, the guard has plenty who are willing to put their life on the line for such a worthy cause. Ocean eyes clashed with disgust. I'm not the kind to simply believe what people tell me, and I'm not about to start now. I don't need your damn guards. I'm only asking for Hinata. All focus returned on her, and she shifted, nearly bowing her gaze to her feet, but then remembering Tamari's previous words and snapping her head up. And I will help you, she said with a nod. But, why me? The question had been nagging at her mind for a while. Tamari had said, herself, that she did not often ask for outside help. Was it because they knew each other? But she seemed to know Naruto, as well, and no matter if he was busy or not, the given situation was serious enough to require his attention if she so asked for it. And he was a king. He could offer plenty more help. So why go to her instead? Why waste months of searching for her? A noticeable shift came to Tamer's person. She switched her legs, letting the right cross over the left instead, and sunk her teeth into the pink of her bottom lip. It was barely obvious, but Hinata saw it clearly as the shuffling stickers on her neck. I asked for guidance from someone, and they suggested you. She spoke smoothly, but quickly. Tamari blinked her eyes twice, then looked away. Apparently, you have a gift for fixing impossible matters. And with the snap of a finger, she turned back and regained that perfect, unaltered eye contact. And to hear a familiar name, well, I supposed it was worth a shot. Karen, skimming once more through Hinata's documents, nodded to herself before dropping the folder and pulling out something from her desk's drawer. Then I see no reason for this to not work. Whatever it was thick and full of paper and tabs of different colors. Karen took her quill and dipped it in ink as she flipped to a page with her other hand. How many days would you prefer them to be there? 4, 5. She began to write something down. Anything will do. Suigetsu has nothing on his schedule for weeks, after all, so. Pardon. Tamari frowned. Did I not make it clear that I want Hinata and only Hinata to come? Karen raised her head and adjusted her glasses. Of course, Ambassador. However, Hinata requires a bodyguard with her at all times. Her left index finger tapped the folder with her records. If she's to go to Sand 1, a guard must come with her. And like clockwork, that tension in the air returned. Hinata took a glance at Suigetsu, expecting to see a pleased smirk on his face, but instead found that he shared Tamari's look of absolute annoyance. There was a drawled hum. Tamari switched her legs once again, tapped her nails, and pondered with a growing frown on her features. But then, something clicked, and her eyes flared. That fire was back, and the room was set ablaze. That's fine, as long as it's not this dolt. Suigetsu bulked as Karen raised a hand to her mouth, most likely to muffle her giggles. Excuse me. With a nod, Tamari stood with her hands planted on her hair flapping around her. Give me Sasuke Uchiha, instead. At that, Karen's amusement vanished, and she gawked. What? I can't. Strutting around the desk, Tamari pressed the button that brought the glowing orb, and with a clear and obviously entertained tone, said, Sasuke Uchiha, you're needed. She pulled away, and the orb disappeared. Karen had the face of someone who had just seen a ghost. A very ugly and entitled ghost. Ambassador, you can't just, she sneered and ground her teeth together. This is my office, and he is under my instruction. He won't just come simply because you. Not even 15 seconds passed, and the door opened. A frightfully familiar buzz of electricity filled the air, but Hinata was surprised by the sheer power of it all. Not so much that she's grown unused to it in the passing weeks, but more so that it just seemed different. Stronger. And with a mostly covered face save from an eye and part of a cheek, Sasuke Uchiha stepped in without hesitation. Karen blinked, jaw hanging, while Suigetsu snickered to himself. Tamari, herself, looked absolutely pleased with herself as she made her way to him, grinning. Sasuke. Tamari, he replied, head tilting slightly. Hinata felt his gaze fall on her. If this is you responding to my letters, a simple confirmation would have sufficed. But just as that feeling of eyes on her came, it left, and Hinata was left to spiral in the buzzing air. It is a confirmation, correct? And when Tamari snorted and patted his shoulder, Karen and Suigetsu flinched, as if expecting him to rip her arm off. But he stayed still, and her grin never fell as she said, Welcome to hell, Sasuke. By some invisible means, Suigetsu managed to pace a dent into her floor. Odd, because if anyone should have something to pace about, it should be her. It was a bit past 6 in the morning, and at 6:30, she was due to meet Sasuke by the Earth portal in the hall. Today was the day. She was to go to hell, to Sand 1, to help His Majesty find his voice. Not only was meeting the man who had plagued her nightmares last night a frightful thought, but the idea of being stuck in one place for 3 days, in the middle of sandstorms and possible assassination attempts, was not a good one, either. She'd barely been given 15 hours to pack and mentally prepare herself for it all, and now. I can't believe you're doing this. Suigetsu was here, awake and alert, pacing holes in her floors. Swimming past him, being sure to not knock into him accidentally, Hinata made her way to the kitchen. Her appetite was long gone, stomach already filled with worry and anxiety, but she felt like she needed to make her hands do something, so she started on making a tuna smoothie. Suigetsu's favorite, she's learned. I'm sure I'll be fine. She wasn't totally sure who she was trying to convince, but she still put as much confidence in her voice as she could. Sasuke, as well as many sand warriors, will be there to protect both me and His Majesty. Which, based off of Suigetsu's skeptical look, was not enough to convince either of them. That's not the problem, Guppy, he said, speeding up in his pacing. The problem is him and that woman. His head snapped her way as she pulled open the fridge's door. 2 days ago, remember when we left early that day? Well, it's because I saw her there, practically stalking you. Freaked the shit out of me. If she really was just coming to get your help, then why didn't she approach you then? So it was Tamari that had riled him up so. Hinata was a bit curious about his consistent displeasure towards the ambassador. Did they know each other, somehow? Had she wronged him in some way? Still, his question caught her attention, and Hinata nearly dropped her tuna as she pondered. I don't know. Exactly, Suigetsu said, swimming over the sofa to look out one of her windows. Something's up with her. He watched her for a moment over his shoulder as she mixed the ingredients in the blender, then he turned back to look outside. There's a reason she doesn't want me there. At first, Hinata had not been too suspicious about Suigetsu being temporarily replaced by Sasuke as her bodyguard. Not only was there an obvious strain between Tamari and Suigetsu, but, as later mentioned when there was more talk of the mission between her, Sasuke, and Tamari, it was better to have as little ocean folk to come as possible. Sand One was a hot, relentless place, and Hinata had already prepared multiple water bottles and fully covered outfits to fight the overbearing sun and heat. Having Sasuke as her bodyguard meant one less person to worry about when it came to dehydration and shrinking gills, and Hinata had agreed. Still did. But, Suigetsu seemed convinced about something. A plot hidden between the fine print. And though Hinata tried to ignore it, her paranoid half was nodding along with him. Chewing at her lip, Hinata turned on the blender, hoping the roaring sound would drown out her nervous thoughts. But when she turned it off and looked away, he was right there, leaning into her face. Promise me you won't be alone in that room for 1 second. Her heart leapt into her throat. His worry for her safety was kind, but he only made her more frightened of this ordeal. Suigetsu. He's crazy, Guppy. Mad. Bloodthirsty. His eyes glared into her, piercing every shred of safety she held close to her heart. If you're alone with him, he'll kill you. Again, those images sprung behind her eyelids, and the smell of blood and death overwhelmed her senses, making her sway. She grabbed the counter and tried to collect herself. Okay. She gave a weak nod. I won't be alone with him. Not an ounce of relief touched his features, and Hinata feared he didn't believe her. Good. But he pulled away and gave her room, and that was enough for her. Flashing him a weak smile, she poured his smoothie and handed him the cup. He took it and downed half of it before she was even out of the kitchen. She went to her room to grab her luggage, and when she returned to the living room, she expected him to have finished it. But he didn't take another sip as he watched her waddle to the door. Don't go outside either, he said. Managing to get the door open, she gave him a confused look. Why? He stared some more, then, finally, finished his smoothie, placed the cup on the kitchen counter, and swam to help her with her luggage, shooting her a grin that she did not believe for even a second. Just don't want you to get burned alive. Folded neatly in the back of the bar, in a shadowy corner that not many drifted to, was a cloak. Dark blue and soft, unlike her other clothes. The one Naruto had given her. She didn't dare bring it to Ocean 11 in fear of it being ruined, so she always left it there to be put on whenever she arrived for the day. Today, however, she danced around the idea of bringing it with her. Sand 1 was known for its horrible winds. With that and the expected sandstorm, she didn't want to risk losing it. But, Guppy, Suigetsu called from behind. Are you comin' or not? With a hanging moment of hesitation, Hinata then grabbed the cloak and pulled it over herself, covering every part of her being in warmth and soft, constant comfort. She took in the cool air through her nose, counted her breaths, and then turned to leave. As expected, Sasuke was 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Possibly earlier, as Hinata had only just shown up. Not that it really mattered. She was there, and there was no going back. Even if every molecule inside her begged her to. If we run now, I think we can make it back to Ocean before he catches up. And, well, the molecules weren't the only ones begging. Eyeing him, Hinata kept her slow pace towards Sasuke. I'm not running, Suigetsu. He sighed. Kidding. Gods, you're no fun. She tried to smile. She really did. But nothing in her shared any amount of enthusiasm for this trip. Pulling her hood closer to her, Hinata picked up the speed, giving herself no more time to second-guess everything. Sasuke turned to them as their approach closened. I'm sure you've packed everything. Suigetsu's huff cut off any reply she had in mind. Obviously. What? You think it's nothing but water in here? He dropped her luggage, which he had perched on his right shoulder, without much grace. This is it. It's only 4 days, right? This should be enough. Sasuke didn't give the bag a glance. He only stared at the earth gate. The silence was deafening, and Hinata tried to fill it. Yes, I'm all packed. And, yes, it's only 4 days. Bending down, Hinata picked up her bag, then smiled at Suigetsu. I'll see you after that, then. He didn't smile back, but rather leaned in and wrapped his arms around her. His clothes were still damp, and his skin was cold and rough. In the corner of her eye, she saw those big, sharp teeth move towards her neck, and she stiffened. Last chance. But the whisper along the curve of her ear reminded her that the Suigetsu she had met 5 months ago, or even 2 weeks ago, was not the one she knew now. Over his shoulder, down the grand hallway, she saw the ocean gate. Longed for it, wished, even, to go back. But she'd made her choice, and she would follow through with it. Pulling away, Hinata glanced at the fresh amount of stickers by his gills. I can't, she whispered, hand going up his neck, tugging at them, startled by how stuck they were. A freezing hand grabbed her wrist and pulled it away, and Suigetsu's grin was toothy as he looked at Sasuke. Take care of her, won't ya? He slinked a hand under her hood to mess with her hair. I need someone to annoy when ya get back. Sasuke turned to move the dial to Sand 1. Go back to the guard, he said. You're just holding us back. TCH. I'll miss you, too. He stepped away, keeping his grin, eyes taking in the cornhusk yellows that spilled into the portal. Hinata had always loved the color yellow. It was a warm, soft color. It reminded her of the sun, or a quiet dawn, or someone. But when it was on Suigetsu, she hated the sight of it. Because, as she looked at him before stepping into that portal, his face was yellow and his eyes were glowing, and she was able to see how totally and completely horrified he was. Hinata had a vague memory of her mother telling her stories of sand. When she'd wake up young with her eyes glued shut with discharge, her mother would wipe her eyes with a warm washcloth and explain that the Sandman must have visited her that day. She heard stories of him, of how his magical sand gave children vivid dreams late at night, and how the leftover sand could glue their eyes shut if the dream was extra powerful. And after he was done spreading dreams, he would go to sand, an enchanted dreamland full of mystery and wonder. Were Hinata still a kid, looking at the world she saw now, her heart would surely break. But she wasn't a kid, nor was she naive. She's heard the stories. She knew what to expect. Sand One fitted the name Hell better than anything else. The second she stepped onto the golden ground, she had to make sure the sole of her shoe hadn't melted off immediately. To say it was hot would be an understatement. It was scorching, to the point of just letting her hand out into the sunlight burned her skin. And the wind was wild and relentless, pushing against her hard, nearly knocking her over. Sasuke had to stand on her right side to keep it from shoving her over, but even he seemed to struggle against its power. And what little it did to cool her down was overpowered by the amount of sand it threw at her face, making it nearly impossible to see. It was a disaster, and they hadn't even made it to Sand One yet. Surrounding the place was a massive stone wall that was well worn by the sandy winds. Flags snapped back and forth, calling their attention to a 25-foot gate. Grabbing her elbow, Sasuke pulled Hinata to him and led them both to the gate. About 4 soldiers dressed in fishnet and flax, tweed vests guarded the entrance while another 2 were positioned at the top of the wall, though Hinata could barely see them through the sand and glare of the sun. As they approached, a guard stepped in front of them with an unusual smile on his face. Sasuke Uchiha. It's been a while. Hinata didn't hear an ounce of bitterness or agitation, nor did Sasuke react defensively. Instead, he pulled out a paper from the inside pocket of his cloak and showed it to the man. It seems you have to let me in, this time. Gawking, the man grabbed the paper and squinted down at its small print. I'll be damned, he whispered, then grinned. You actually got it. After, what, 6 months? 7. Sasuke kept his hand out, and after a moment of gaping, the soldier handed it back to him before turning to Hinata. His face turned puzzled as he bent down to get a look at her face. And who might this be? Hinata blushed and tried to back away, but Sasuke's left hand grabbed her hood and pulled it over her face before tugging her forward. Confidential, he said. Open the gate. Hinata couldn't see his face, but the soldier huffed. PFF'd. Secretive bastard. Oi, next time you come by, tell me how you finally got the okay from His Majesty to step foot in our Grand District. There was a loud shrill, followed by some cranking and calling between villagers. When Hinata managed a glance from her hood, she saw that the bars of the gate had been lifted, allowing her and Sasuke to enter. Beyond the walls of Hell was the city of Hell. Building-wise, it was full to the brim. Neighborhoods snug against one another, houses upon houses, there were barely any alleyways, as nearly every nook and cranny was used for space. The roads were narrow and windy, littered with gravel and sand. There was barely any greenery and no water in sight, which made Hinata's mouth dry by just thinking of it. But when it came to people, the place was empty. Barren. Hinata saw no one but soldiers roam the streets. Windows were shuttered and doors were locked. It was almost like no one lived there to begin with. It was about a 30-minute walk to get to the castle, which, while grand in architecture and size, blended in with all the other sandstone buildings about. There was another, smaller gate surrounding it, and they were let in when Sasuke showed off the papers he had. When they stepped inside the palace, it wasn't any cooler inside, and Hinata was sure she had already sweated buckets by then. Give me a second, please. Falling to her knees, she dug into her luggage bag and pulled out a bottle, gulping down nearly all of the water in one take. Her gills flexed in delight, and her throat felt a lot better, but the rest of her body was still hot and sticky with sweat, and she felt miserable. Sasuke stood, watching for a moment, before turning to approaching footfalls. Oh, good, you're both here. Temari walked in wearing a regal, emerald dress that did not match her previous outfit whatsoever. The chiffon shawl around her shoulders dipped further downwards as she came closer, and her lips were shining as she turned to greet Sasuke. I hope the way here was pleasant. He hummed, head turning this way and that, more interested in the surrounding architecture to reply to her niceties. Or rather, that's what it seemed, at first. But then he faced her again, saying, it was fine. Temari kept her smile as she glanced at Hinata, who stayed on the floor, putting away her now empty water bottle. I'm glad to see you back here. It's been years since you've last visited here. Not a single thing about the place looked distinctly familiar, but Hinata simply nodded and agreed. I hope I won't cause too much trouble in staying here. Nonsense, Temari said, waving her hand. Our staff is fully prepared to accommodate to any needs of yours. She turned on the heels of her wedges and began down the grand hallway, which was decorated with paintings and crystal chandeliers. Down the hallway to the left are our private bathing rooms that I'm sure will help you plenty during your stay. On the opposite are the staff chambers and the kitchen. If you follow me this way, I can take you to the staircase, which will lead us to your room. Said staircase was decorated in velvet carpet with marble posting. Maids were about, sweeping up and sand that happened to get in somehow. On the second floor was a wide hallway that branched off into 4 separate directions. Temari turned down the east path, and they were led down a windowless corridor with decorative, turquoise wallpaper and busts of seemingly important figures positioned on stone posts. They reached the third door to the left and stopped in front of it. This will be your room. Temari gestured with her shoulder, and Sasuke was the first to open the door and step in to investigate. A room with no windows was requested, not many, of which, can be found in such a place. She winked her way, smirking. But I usually figure things out. This used to be a storage room, but we managed to fix it up for your stay, Moon, Sasuke interjected as he exited the room. That's what she will be called when staying here. Temari frowned, but nodded. Of course. I nearly forgot. Hinata waved her hands. No, it's Finn. Go and unpack, Moon Witch. Sasuke moved around her to station himself by the wall. He fell into his normal, crossed pose, right eye staring Temari down without waver. What do you have planned after this? Snorting, Temari brushed a few strands of hair from her face. My brother is a busy man. He won't have time to see her until later today. I hope to give you a quick tour of the grounds so that you will become familiar with the area. Afterwards, you may do as you please until this evening. Lunch is at noon, if that tickles your fancy. Dragging her bag into the room, Hinata made sure Temari saw her gratitude by smiling over her shoulder. Thank you. I will enjoy my stay here. Those eyes softened, almost matched the lush green of her dress, before they sparked and sharpened once again. Let's just hope you know what you're doing, Moon. Temari turned and, after saying a few additional words to Sasuke, left. Hinata stepped further into her room, pulling her hood back slightly to get a better look of the place. The ceiling was low, but not nearly as low as her home in Ocean 11. With no windows, the only light that came was from lanterns on the side tables and whatever light came from the hallway. The room was small, but relatively empty, making it feel spacious. The bed was plain and covered in white sheets and a thick quilt. A wooden wardrobe stood to the left, and a small desk and chair sat on the opposite wall. Hinata pulled her bag to the bed and unhooked its latches, opening it completely. By the doorway, Sasuke stood, halfway stepped inside as he took glances inside and outside the room. I hope your room is as nice as mine, Hinata said, already pulling out some of her clothes to hand in the wardrobe. Is yours the room to my left or right? Sasuke stared down the hall, then slowly faced her. Neither. She stopped. Pardon, I don't have a room, he said. What? Then where will you sleep? His revealed brow dipped slightly. I won't sleep. She didn't bother to hide her surprise, and he rolled his right shoulder. I have a duty to follow. She knew that. But to lose sleep for her sake. Will you be sleeping at all, then, Sasuke? His left cheek twitched, and he turned away. I'm not repeating myself. And that all too familiar feeling of her heart tumbling to her stomach made her spirits fall to the ground, fizzing out, like stickers. I'm sorry, she whispered. Unpack, then come outside. But he never did care for her apologies, and with the shut of her door, Hinata was alone. About 2 hours later, Hinata was unpacked and nearing the end of the quite long tour of the rather large palace. If people had told her that the guard was confusing, then they should visit the Sand Palace. It was a gigantic place full of twisting hallways and rooms that connected to different rooms that connected to even more different rooms. Hinata was sure she would get lost at least a handful of times, but thankfully, Temari knew her way around, and she walked around the place with a finesse that Hinata could barely fathom. And here we have the final room of our tour, Temari announced as she pushed against twin, wooden doors that opened into a large, high-ceiling room. This is what we like to call the puppet room. The second Hinata stepped in, she found out why. Hanging on the walls, off of workshop staples, and over chairs were perhaps hundreds of life-size puppets. Tools and thread and other materials were thrown all about the place, and everywhere she looked, she could find someone was working on a puppet. A part of her was daunted by the place. Somehow, the life-size puppets made it look like these people were working real people. But the atmosphere was light, so she tried to calm herself down. As I'm sure I've mentioned, our soldier number is lacking, so we make up for it with puppets. Temari weaved past people with a skip in her step. She was obviously pleased with the room. My brother, Kankuro, has the ability to control the things. So he made a school to teach others to build and control their own puppets. We have about 60 of them guarding the palace alone. In the future, we could have up to thousands in hell, alone. She stopped in the middle of the busy room, a hand at her eyes. Oh, where is that? Oh, Kankuro. Across the way, past shoulders and puppet parts, Hinata got a look of a man walking towards them. His features were decorated with purple paint, highlighting his expressions, making him seem more vivid than the people around him. Temari, is this the hot fish lady you told me was coming over? But more so was his language that caught her attention, and Hinata didn't realize she could feel any hotter in such a melting place. Her mind went blank, any retorts thrown out the nearest window. Thankfully, Temari was there to back her up as she pulled her brother by the ear and smacked the back of his head. Moron. You just met her, and you're already making a fool of us. Temari. I just complimented her, is all. Then I suggest keeping your damn compliments to yourself. The room's buzz died down for a moment. Temari snapped her head away from her brother to give every worker in that room a rather unladylike glare, and when they quickly returned to their work, she snorted and wiped her hands on the skirt of her dress. I apologize for my brother's flabby mouth. Not all of the family acts like him. Purple lips twisted. Oi, remind me again who you invite to parties to finesse the stingy guests. We wouldn't have the funds to afford half of this if it weren't for my flabby mouth. Seeing that the conversation was going nowhere, Hinata decided to step in before it got too heated. It's a pleasure to meet you, Kankuro. Please, call me Moon. He held his hand out in greeting, and she took it politely. The pleasure's all mine. But seriously, you can. He trailed off as his gaze skimmed her nearly hidden face, eyes widening with every passing second. Holy shit. Hinata. Temari hissed, and Sasuke, she had almost forgotten he was there. He was so quiet, got in between the two of them, shoulders arching slightly as the sound of buzzing filled the air. Of the lightning sort, of course. Hinata was sure she would start to hear that sound in her dreams. Shut it, Temari whispered, eyes flying around the room. Don't call her that here. Kankuro blinked down at the katana, then at his sister, then at Hinata. What the hell is happening here? It took a good 10 minutes in a secluded room to educate Kankuro on the recent happenings regarding her and her lapse in memory, and he was left, nearly collapsed, against the wall once it was all finished. You can't be serious. I am, Tamari said. When in public, we have to call her Moon. For both her safety, and for our own. He slowly nodded, then turned to look at her. Hinata played with the hem of her hood, still a bit put off by everything. Somehow, she was still unnerved by the idea of people knowing her when she hadn't an idea of who they were. So you really don't remember me? At all? Smile turning sad, she said, not at all. I'm sorry. What about Naruto? Again, her heart jumped at the name alone. Why yes, I know Naruto. And for some reason, that seemed to relieve him of some worry. Well, at least there's a starting point. Pushing off the wall, Kankuro walked over and grabbed one of her hands to lightly pull her towards the door. Here, Moon. Let me show you how I control the puppets. You used to love it when I showed you, so maybe this will jog your memory. He led her out the room, 2 sets of footsteps following after them. When they returned to the puppet room, he took her to a back corner, where a rather tidy station was set. A nearly finished puppet sat in a chair, one eye missing while the other gave her a glassy stare. Kankuro told her to stop a few feet away while he walked closer. Okay. Watch closely. His fingers popped and stretched out, and from their tips came thin, nearly invisible strings that attached themselves to the limbs of the puppet. It began to stir, one eye blinking. A lifeless arm reached towards her, wooden fingers clicking against its palm. Shock rolled its course through her system, followed by amazement and a bit of fear. Hinata had the mind to reach out and touch it, but just as her arm began to move, something hard and heavy shoved into her side, knocking her over. She yelped and tumbled over. A stool was next to her, close enough for her to bang her head against, and she tried to turn midair to avoid such a blow. A crash, however, was all that came, and when she fell on her back, her first reaction was to look over and find that the stool was on its side a few feet away. Afterwards, of course, she looked up. And found eyes, as glassy as those of the puppet, staring back. Sasori. Kankuro yelled from the side. What the hell? Watch where you're going. Help her up, already. Red hair tumbled over those eyes as the thin man bent over to grab her arm and yank her up. Another pressure on the backs of her shoulders helped her up. When she turned back, she only saw Sasuke picking up the thrown stool. Say sorry, Kankuro said. When you knock into someone, you have to say you're sorry. You're sorry, Sasori drawled. Kankuro frowned and knocked his shoulder into the redhead's arm. Har har, wise guy. I mean it. Apologize. Those glassy eyes blinked, sending a shiver up Hinata's spine. A pause, and then, with the same enthusiasm of a rock, Sasori said, I'm sorry. Hinata, fixing her hood and cloak, couldn't meet his eye. It's fine. Without another word, the man walked away. Kankuro snorted and shook his head. I swear, that man can't be human. He looked back at her, lips twitching awkwardly. Sorry about that, he's a good puppeteer, but the same can't be said in regards to his people skills. Are you alright? I'm fine, Hinata said with a nod. Tamari, however, didn't bother to hide the roll of her eyes. From the fall, maybe, but, gods, Hinata. I got a good look at your face when you were knocked over. You look like a damn fountain. Startled, she rubbed the back of her hand against her face. When she pulled away, it was completely damp, and she was reminded of just how hot it was. I'm sorry. I'm not used to the heat. No shit, Kankuro piped. Not to mention you're decked in black. I get you need to stay covered 'cause of your fish skin and all that, but wearing dark clothes ain't the way to go. He nodded at her cloak. My suggestion, lose the cloak. Really. The idea of not only showing off her face, but getting rid of the one comfort she had, was not a good one. Hinata looked at Tamari for confirmation, who frowned in thought before clucking to herself. I'll loan you some lighter colored clothes. I suggest us in one of the private baths before seeing my brother. They all made their way back to the entrance of the puppet room. Tamari pushed open the twin doors, then paused. And while I'm doing that, I'll give you more appropriate gowns, too, if need be. The nights here are freezing, so you'll do good in bundling up. Sweltering days and freezing nights. Yeah, hell definitely fitted the place. She was in the middle of situating the new clothes she'd be wearing after her bath when a knock came to the door. Jumping, embarrassed that she was startled by something so simple, Hinata tried to hide her blush as she called for the person to come in. The door opened, and Sasuke took a single step inside. They told me that a maid has prepared a bath for you. Excited to finally be able to clean herself properly, Hinata nodded, grabbed her fresh outfit, and after he took a quick glance over her shoulder, she followed Sasuke to the private baths. Do you need one, Sasuke? She asked, being careful to watch her footing while following. He still made the effort to walk as quickly as possible, and she didn't want to fall over for the second time that day. I'm sure the maids can prepare one for you, as well. They came to a door, and he twisted the silver knob and pushed it open. I need to watch you. Her bare feet landed on the cool tile, but every other part of her felt hot. Watch me. He was in the middle of the large, white bathroom, eyes scanning every inch. He even made an effort to check the bathwater before, finally, turning to her. Though she was not unfamiliar with the feeling of his eyes tracing her face, something about this occasion seemed off. He was slow, taking his time, as if struggling to read her, despite having done it well multiple times before. Then, with a blink, things seemed to click in place. Guard you, he corrected, pointing his chin towards the door. Out there. Though knowing he would be out there would still make this relaxing bath a bit awkward, Hinata took it over him glaring about while in the room with her, so she nodded and smiled and whispered she wouldn't take long. Because Sasuke didn't like his time being wasted, and she didn't want an irritated Sasuke to waft about her for the next 4 days. The bath, for the most part, was refreshing. She was able to wash all the sweat and grime off of her, as well as properly wash her hair for the first time in months. It took a while to get used to the steaming water, she was so used to the cold, ocean's waters. But for a good 20 minutes, she was able to sit back in the polished tub and let the water seep into her muscles and calm the tension in her body. But panic always had a way to peep in the most unusual of cases, and this was no different. She had forgotten her cloak. Or misplaced it. Or lost it altogether. She wasn't sure. Hinata was almost sure she had brought it with her, but when she dried off and got dressed, it was nowhere to be found. There was no way she could leave without it on. She may as well just scream her name out in the middle of the castle. Stupid. I'm so stupid. Her gaze fell on the door. Somewhere out there, Sasuke was waiting in the hall. Maybe if she asked, "What are you thinking?" Hinata gripped at her arm, nails leaving crescent marks in her skin. This is Sasuke. He'll more likely humiliate you than actually help you. But even so, it was better than getting spotted by someone. Not to mention you're too intimidated by him to ask for anything. And maybe that was true. But Hinata knew, eventually, she'd have to get over that easily scared side of her. Neji had said it himself. She could be brave and strong, too. She just had to try. And what better way to start than with something as simple as asking your bodyguard to pick you up a cloak? Simple. Sighing, Hinata slowly walked to the door and pressed her fingers against the wood. Her hair, already dry, fell over her shoulder and thumped lightly against the door. This is simple, Hinata. You can do this. Raising her right hand into a fist, she knocked her knuckles, and called, Sasuke. The knob turned, and she stepped back, regretting everything. I should have just worn a towel. I shouldn't have bothered him. Oh, Hinata, why are you so? Here. Something soft and dark blue was pressed against her tummy, and she looked down to find that Sasuke had given her the cloak. Quickly, she grabbed it and threw it on, checking her reflection for only a second in the mirror before leaving the private bath and meeting him in the hallway. I'm sore. It was in your room, he said. Hinata flushed. Thank why. Tamari told me His Majesty should be ready to see you soon. He left, and she followed the flap of his cloak, desperately trying to get a look at his face. Hours later, and the palace had gone from scorching to icy with the set of the red sun. It was late at night, and despite the days she's had, Hinata couldn't find it in herself to sleep. No matter how she tossed or turned, how she straightened her sheets or fluffed her pillow, she simply could not sleep. The lanterns on the side tables were out, and her bottles were filled in case she woke up in the middle of the night with a dry mouth. Everything was fine. She was fine. So why? Actually, it's obvious. Sat on the foot of her bed was her figment cousin, who looked like a ghost watching over her in the dark room. Stop thinking of him like that. He's not a ghost, Hinata. It's stress. And he was right. Of course. She hadn't been able to meet the Sand King that day. When he wasn't busy, he outright refused to see her, which confused Tamari and Kankuro to no end. Hinata wasn't sure if she had done something to offend him, or if he knew her from the past and had a grudge against her. All she knew was that she only had one day to work with him before the sandstorm would start. That was not enough time. Especially for such a mad, insane. Tamari and Kankuro seem happy, Neji mused. How can they be like that with such a cruel brother? That was true, and Hinata had also noticed the staff here seemed pretty happy with their job. She couldn't understand it. If all that were true, then why were all these memories telling her otherwise? Why had she heard so many stories of him being horrible to his family and subjects? Neji turned to face her completely, a small smile adorning his lips. We'll get our answers tomorrow. When we see him. We will. She wasn't sure if he'd let her come talk to him ever during her stay here. But Neji seemed convinced it would happen, so she tried to let that stick to her mind as she settled back and tried to sleep. And tried. And, oh, who was she kidding? This was bound to be another sleepless night. I guess I'll be up all night with Sasuke. Wait. Pulling the covers away from her, Hinata slipped out from her bed and stood. The floor was frigid, and her toes curled at the touch, but she did not jump back in bed, but instead worked on pulling the heavy quilt off. He's probably freezing out there. Neji watched her for a moment, then asked, as she made her way to the door, where are you going? Pulling the quilt over her shoulder, she said, not far. The door opened, and Sasuke was already standing. What's wrong? Nothing, she quickly said, smiling, hoping to show him everything was fine. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. He didn't say anything, only sat back down on the opposite side of the hallway. What is it? When he spoke, fog left his mouth, and Hinata quickly walked over and bent down to his level. Here, take this. She tugged the quilt off and wrapped it around him, tucking it around his arms and making sure it draped down to cover his legs. He was completely still as she situated everything, almost not daring to breathe. Were Hinata not so totally used to it, she would have been concerned. There. Pulling away, she was first met with a narrow eye. I don't need this. Which was followed by a voice that matched the coldness of the night. But Hinata didn't ponder on it too hard. I couldn't sleep because I was worried you would freeze to death. I won't, he droned. I know, she said, tugging at a corner of the quilt, because you have this now. For a moment, only the distant, wailing wind could be heard. Then, good night, Sasuke. She waited, gave him whatever time he needed. Again came the wind and the shift of floorboards as maids on the other side of the building continued through the night. It was a nice noise. Quiet. Peaceful. It reminded her of Moon too, and, again, he reminded her of Neji, of a proud boy who sometimes needed time to process things. So she gave him time. She stood in that hallway as minutes passed. Her toes were beginning to freeze. The wind continued. The maids worked. Nothing. Sasuke isn't Neji, she told herself, smiling awkwardly as she turned to her room. Good night. The door closed, and her chest was filled. Filled with a whisper. Just one. Quiet, but sturdy. And she was right. Sasuke wasn't Neji, because Neji wasn't here right now. But Sasuke was. Through the fog of his own breath, Sasuke saw the approach of someone. Standing, left knee popping from him being in the same position for far too long, he turned to face down the hallway. It was a woman. Her footsteps were light, though not exactly inaudible, and her entire being was sheathed in the darkness of the twilight. When he became noticeably in her sight, she did not slow or hesitate, bringing Sasuke to the conclusion that if she were any danger, it would not be so immediate as to attack him straight on. How utterly boring. Not even bothering to warn her with the subtle slip of his cloak behind his scabbard, he shifted from one leg to the other as he watched her approach. Behind the door, not a stir could be heard, and he was sure the Moon Witch was fast asleep. And it ought to stay that way. The woman didn't exactly scream trouble, and Sasuke was familiar with such a wail. Oh, ah. The woman slowed. A crinkled sound fluttered through the air, and through the dark, Sasuke saw the straight, pale line of parchment paper. Finally, she came to a stop just a few steps away from him, any less, and he'd surely have to scare her off. But she must have sensed his tension, for she made no move to come any closer. You must be the Thor warrior. State your name. With her there, he was able to see her attire. Beige and plain, a white apron around her waist and a white mob cap atop her short hair. The skirt of her gown was long, and though it could easily hide a knife of some kind, he doubted it highly. Based on the eased slope of her shoulders alone, he could tell she had no intentions to attack. And your purpose? Her dark, wide eyes blinked. Ah, I'm sorry. Her head bowed, and her hands pulled the parchment close to her. I'm Matsuri. I'm a maid here. Her smile was dim as her eyes flickered to the door by his right shoulder, and then she added, and I've come to deliver a letter to the Moon Witch. Stepping closer to the door, blocking most of her view of it, he held out a gloved hand. I'll take it. Again, her eyes blinked, and it somehow reminded him of Hinata. Naively, obliviously, like she hadn't an idea as to why he would demand such a thing. But he figured it was obvious. It should be. Even if she weren't showing any signs of being armed, there was no way he was simply going to let her stroll into Hinata's room in the middle of the night. With a sharp exhale, he flexed his fingers, reminding her of his waiting hand. With a reluctant slug in her motions, she placed the letter in his hands, and he immediately flipped it over to find the king's emblem on the front, embedded in hardened, red wax. Bringing it to his nose, he smelled the paper, did not pick up anything that could be poison, and folded it into his inside pocket. Something shattered in Matsuri's gaze. Her hope had just been destroyed. Of what? He could take a guess. For her eyes remained on that closed door as she said, I was hoping to ask her, if she would really be able to help His Majesty. Her gaze flickered his way, and Sasuke was sure to keep his expression void of any irritation. It would do neither of them much good if she grasped onto his annoyance in a way to irritate him into giving in to her wishes. All he did was frown and turn his head slightly to the side. Matsuri let out a small, quiet sound, not exactly a groan or a hum, but a noise that sunk with her mood. Thor, she whispered, stepping to the side to find his face, are the rumors true? About what the Moon Witch can do? He trained his eyes on the end of the hallway, hoping she'd get the idea before that thin string of patience he had snapped. Why bother asking me? He wondered, deciding to lean against the door now, drilling it in deeper that he had zero intentions of letting anyone inside that room. She should know I won't bite. And he didn't. Not really. Not totally. But he did nibble. Slowly. Cautiously. He let his mind wander back to the rumors he's heard about the Moon Witch, back to what Naruto and the guard had told him about her. Apparently, she had eyes that could see things that others couldn't, and with this unusual ability, she roamed the corridors of the hall, waiting for anyone who sought for her help. But he's never seen anything happen when he spent those hours in the bar with her. She'd touch people's faces and talk with them, and that was all. No magic. No hidden ability brought to light. And when she had touched his face that first time, somehow, he could still feel her fingers on him. They swiped along his brow, then down the side of his nose. Her thumb lightly brushed his eyelid, wiping at something that wasn't even there. And when she was done, she had looked pleased, and he had. Well, at the time, he would have sworn something had changed. But now he wasn't sure. Maybe he was remembering things differently. Maybe nothing had happened. Because when he returned home that night, nothing about him was different. He was still Sasuke Uchiha, his blade was still bright and electric, and his wings were still on his back. Naruto had described it in detail about how he felt whenever she plucked at his face. It's like the world is lifted off my shoulders, and I can finally breathe again. Breathe again. Let her help you at least once. I want you to be happy again. Happy again. I don't know. Obviously, that wasn't the answer Matsuri wanted to hear, but Sasuke ignored her frown and continued to watch down the hallway. Well, I'm not about to lose hope now. Recovering quickly, her mouth was once again adorning a smile, and she gave a sturdy nod to her head. I'm sure she'll help His Majesty with his voice. I can only hope it will be before the sandstorm hits. Based on how difficult the Sand King was making it to pay him a simple visit, Sasuke highly doubted that. A sudden, unexpected moment of silence. Had she left? A tug came to his sleeve, and Sasuke cursed himself for getting his hopes up. Snapping his arm away, he glared down at the woman, and she took a step back, owlish eyes never leaving his face. Does she use magic? Matsuri asked. Like that of a cool breeze washing over his face, Sasuke felt something brush under his right eye. A gentle touch, genuine, without the heat of magic along its pores. No. Then, what does she do, exactly? Patience meeting their end, he shoots her a mean smirk, eyes glinting in the dark. What witches do best? Trick people. And like clockwork, all hope and wonder in Matsuri's face dropped to the ground, shattering at her feet, so broken that it would take much time and care to ever rebuild it again. Her doe eyes tilted into slits as she glared at that door he protected with his whole being. It was almost as if that fire in her eyes were pointed his way, and he relished in the feeling of it. Go, his mind hissed. Go, and don't bother me again. One step after the other, Matsuri went further and further away. Some hesitation still stuck to her heels, but she eventually turned and made her way down the hallway. Sasuke nearly had the mind to kick his leg out in frustration when she turned back to him, but the hollowness of her gaze kept him at bay. That smile was fake, and her head bowed. Good night, and stay warm. A heaviness came to his shoulders. At first, he thought it was guilt, but then he looked down and realized the blanket that Hinata had given him was still around him. Pushing off the door, he walked to the opposite side of the hallway, sat down, and counted down the minutes to sunrise. The Sand King's stamp embedded in the dried, red wax on the back of a white envelope was the first thing Hinata saw when she was stirred awake. It sat on the low side table, and were it a person, Hinata was sure it would have Sasuke's gaze as it stared back at her, making her feel small and anxious. Sitting up, Hinata pulled away the sheets before leaning over to grab the letter. She didn't have to look to know Sasuke was in the room, watching her every move. As per usual, But when she began to tear the envelope open, his haunting gaze fell to her hands, and she realized they were both eager to see what was written inside. Dark red ink decorated the folded paper inside, looping and sagging with every cursive word it spelled. Her eyes darted to the signature at the bottom, Gara, King of Sand, and felt her mouth dry. What could he possibly have to write to me? Her stomach was twisting itself into knots, but she pushed through her nervousness and began to read from the start. To Hinata, as I despise the name Moon Witch for you. It happened 2 years ago. You were visiting us with the company of the Sun King, Naruto Uzumaki. You were a cheerful soul back then, both of you were, but Naruto had the decency to not over-exaggerate. When I think back to it, a demon overcomes me, and I wish I had delved into my urges then. It had been morning. You both had asked me the night prior to let you into my chambers at dawn. I shouldn't have agreed, but I did, and that demon haunted me for the rest of the night. You showed up first. Smiling. Sickening. Disgusting. It took me 3 seconds to come to terms with the fact I wanted to kill you, and even less to act upon it. What stopped me was Naruto. Had he not come, you would be dead, and I would be less tortured. My brother and sister have informed me of your memory issues. I suspect that is why you have come to my home so openly, without hesitation. Like a lamb, I'm writing to tell you I have the greatest thrill to spill blood, and if you dare show your face to me, I will not stop myself like last time. Actually, it would be a wonderful pleasure, and you would do well in ending my regrets of 2 years ago. Naruto is not here this time. Remember that. Gara, King of Sand. The letter fluttered to the ground, red words smeared with blood and gore. A stench took over the sweltering atmosphere, and her stomach untwisted itself to lurch forward, sending bile to her throat. She couldn't remember it. That morning, 2 years ago. When she tried, nothing but static came to her screaming mind. But his letter painted enough of the picture for her to fill in the holes. Those memories that were stuck to her head suddenly made a lot more sense, and when Hinata finally tore her eyes away from those bloody letters, she found him at the door. Gara, the devil, looking exactly like the very threats he wrote to her in whimsical cursive. A layer of sand covered him, but his dead eyes were bare and penetrating. His fingers danced at his, and outside, the red sun of the dawn was hidden behind a ferocious sandstorm that moved along with his deep breaths. He was going to kill her. She was stuck here, and he was going to kill her. Nothing would escape her. Not a scream. Not a cry for help. Not even a plea for her life. She would die alone in that hellhole, never to imagine her cousin again or feel Naruto's warmth again or succumb to that hurricane of electricity. Lady Hinata. Moon Witch. Suddenly, everything was gone, leaving only the heat in her pounding chest. Neji stood over the letter, sweat rolling down the side of his face. Behind him, Sasuke stood away from the wall, dark eye smoldering with something she was too distracted to understand. The doorway was empty and the sandstorm had disappeared, but the smell of blood was still in the air, twisting around her tongue, its bitterness making her eyes water. I can't do this. She looked at her cousin, eyes big and begging. It was stupid, asking help from her own imagination, but she was desperate. What do I do? Should I try to sneak out now, or should I not leave this room for the next 3 days? Her cold fingers curled into the sheets of her bed. Neji, help me, please. He shook his head. This isn't right. His left foot just barely missed the letter as he stepped forward, planting his hands on her shoulders, his fingers sinking into her skin. You need to talk to him. Was she insane, telling herself such things? Why would she? I can't, Hinata whispered, scooting back on the mattress to put a distance between her and her cousin. I can't go to him. I'm not like you. If I leave, he'll kill me. Neji frowned, but didn't say a word. Instead, he stepped away and watched with storming eyes as Sasuke Uchiha bent over, picked up the letter, read it, and clicked his tongue before throwing it on the side table. "You've already started talking to yourself again," he muttered. "Imagine how bad it'll get after 3 days of being stuck in here." He pinned her down with his gaze, stickers wafting with expectation. She didn't say a word. Honestly, she wasn't too sure what he wanted to hear from her. He read the letter. He saw what Gaara had threatened. There was no way he could possibly expect her to. "And not only are you depriving me of sleep, but of food, as well." Hinata sat forward slightly, feet folding beneath her. They sent someone to tell you that breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes. His right shoulder motioned towards the door, closed and locked properly. Keeping anyone outside, out, and, if she so chose it, anyone inside, in. I'll tell them to stop sending people. There was a click, and when she blinked, she found him by the door, unlocking it, face turned towards her. Despite his words, not a hint of anger was in his tone or body language. "If anything, I don't need to be constantly reminded of the cruelty of my moon witch." He sounded amused. Sweat collected along her forehead as she flushed. "Sasuke, if you need me, I'll be starving in the hallway." The door opened, then closed. When her eyes sank from the door, she found a familiar quilt at the foot of the bed. Folded perfectly, as if to be stored away without further use. She stared at it, and only looked away when Neji drifted past it, humming. "If you won't leave," he mused, "then he'll freeze tonight, as well." Her shoulders dropped, and with twiddling fingers and a bad taste in her mouth, she slowly slipped out from bed and pulled out one of the outfits Tamari had lent her. 10 minutes later, she stepped into the hallway, lit with the amber glow of candlelight. Before her was, of course, Sasuke. Already standing, probably hadn't even sat down in the first place. Why would he, when he was so sure she'd be out in just a few minutes? The second her shoes met the carpet floor and her eyes adjusted to the light, Hinata became aware of a few things. Firstly, she no longer found it necessary to see his face to have an inkling of what Sasuke thought, of what Sasuke felt. Secondly, it was most likely due to the fact that he was letting her, and not simply because she was getting used to him. And lastly, that did not change the fact that she wanted to get those damn weeds off of him. If anything, it only made her more determined. The dining hall was as grand as any other room in the palace, and that did nothing in calming Hinata's nerves. In fact, the scarlet walls only depleted her appetite, and with a sinking stomach, she looked down at the plate a maid had set before her. The table was long, perhaps able to fit 20 people on either side. That day, however, only 4 sat at the table, and thus only the end was used. Maids danced around to set a fabulous feast down, presenting far too much food for just 4 people to eat. But while Hinata went pale with every new entree placed, Kankuro and Temari's faces beamed, as if ready to accept the challenge wholeheartedly. When Hinata looked to her right to see Sasuke's reaction, she was only met with a stiff posture and crossed arms, that guarded, suspicious pose she knew so well. But before she could inquire about it, the maids lined the table and bowed, and Tamari clapped her hands. "Well, dig in, everyone." Kankuro did not have to be told twice, for he had already piled the dates and fried eggs onto his plate. Tamari was scouring the cheeses, taking her time, as if it were the most important decision in her life. Sasuke, however, held back. For a guy who was apparently starving, he sure showed a lack of interest in the food before him. "He's probably waiting for me," she thought, placing her napkin on her lap before grabbing her plate. Her observation was confirmed when she watched his face trail her arm's every move as she pocketed falafel in pita bread and scooped up a couple spoonfuls of figs. When she settled back, he uncrossed his arms, and said, "Give your plate to me." Hinata blinked, startled, but pushed it over to him. Did he want me to make a plate for him? Somehow, that reminded her of her little sister, and she smiled as she watched him take a bite of the figs in the falafel. He chewed slowly, wiped his mouth with his napkin, peered off at nothing, then pushed the plate back to her. Go ahead. Oh. He began to make his own plate of food, ignoring the flustered look developing on her face. Of course. He was tasting for poison. Feeling silly, she picked at her food, taking small bites here and there, appetite still not completely there. Is it not good? Tamari asked her, eyeing her plate, which did not meet the emptiness of the others at the table. We asked them to make your favorite. Is something wrong with it? Her favorite. She tried the falafel again, enjoying the taste that lingered on her tongue. There was something about it. Something familiar. She couldn't put her finger on it, but her mouth somehow watered at just the look of it alone. That helped bring a bit of her appetite back, and she went at her breakfast more vigorously. It's fine, she said. Thank you. Temari's smile turned relaxed, and next to her, Kankuro beamed. I knew it. Does it bring anything back? You used to eat this all the time when you and Naruto would come and visit. Again, he brought it up. Her and Naruto having come here, apparently quite often. It had to be true. How could they have known her so well if it weren't? A bit of irritation raised up inside her as her mind came up with a blank canvas when she tried to imagine her and Naruto here, eating at this table, roaming through these halls. So Naruto and I really are friends. Hinata sipped at her water, gills bending slightly along her neck. But how? Thinking hard about it hurt her head, and unconsciously, her eyes turned to the empty chair at the end of the table. Those words from the Sand King's letter echoed in her mind, ricocheting along the walls of her skull, doing nothing to help mend the pain already there. Then, does that mean what he wrote is true, too? Tamari paused in her eating to follow her gaze. A sad smile came to her. I know. I wish he would have joined us, too. Hinata flinched, which went unnoticed by all but one of the people at the table. Kankuro grumbled to himself as he scraped seconds onto his plate. I can't understand it, he said. Why is he avoiding her? What could he possibly be scared of? Dropping her silverware, Hinata folded her hands on her lap and bowed her head, hiding behind the hood of her cloak. I should tell him. The letter was still in her room, on that side table. She didn't have the courage to carry it around with her. But if they needed proof, she'd have to show it to them. After breakfast, I'll mention it to them. But her line of thought was cut off by a snort, and that easy grin was once again on Kankuro's features. Not that I'm totally worried. He looked across the table at her, dark eyes shining with confidence. In her, somehow, that made her feel only more hot and uncomfortable. He'll just tell us when Moon gets his voice back. I'm sure this can all be explained once it's all fixed. That amount of confidence, and their total faith in her. Oh, gods. There was no way she could hide in her room forever, not when they clearly needed her so desperately. It was obvious by how they looked at that empty chair when they thought she wasn't looking. They missed him. They were nervous for him. They wanted things to be normal again, and they truly thought she was the key to that happening. They'd been kind enough to have her stay, to make her feel as comfortable as possible. Who was she to deny them of her help? Who was she to come here for nothing? Neji's words from last night whispered along her ear. Tamari and Kankuro seem happy. How can they be like that with such a cruel brother? We'll get our answers tomorrow. When we see him. He had spoken like he was sure there was more to the story, and for her own sanity, she had to believe that. Even with that letter and those haunting, red words, she had to believe there was something else. Something that just was hidden out of view. If she didn't, then there was no way she would be able to force herself to go to Gaara. Gulping down the rest of her water, Hinata pushed her plate away, stating she wasn't as hungry as she thought she was. Tamari and Kankuro shared a look, and Sasuke kept eating. That's a shame, Tamari mused as Kankuro called for a maid to fill up Hinata's glass. The chef's maid O'Malley, that bread pudding you like. At the name, her mouth once again watered, and a sweet smell came to her nose. Her stomach gurgled, but when she looked over to Sasuke, who had stopped eating suddenly, she recalled his scowl at her sugar-upped coffee and said, shyly, maybe a different time. Puppets littered the halls. With the sandstorm fast approaching, the castle was bustling. Maids checked every room, every corner, every cranny for anything suspicious. A few soldiers were working on boarding up the windows. But most noteworthy were the puppets, stationed in every hallway, stood and sturdy, glassy eyes staring off at nothing. They looked so real, it was hard to tell they were made of wood and plastic. But Hinata could tell. They didn't have any stickers. Their faces were plain and flawless, without emotion. And that is exactly what Hinata found when she rounded a corner and found the large, walnut doors that led into the Sand King's chambers. 4 of them were based there, swords hanging at their hands already wrapped around their hilts upon her slow, uneasy approach. They did not move to attack, but Hinata was still awfully weary of them. Stopping a good 10 feet away from them, Hinata played with the hem of her cloak, unsure how to proceed. Over her shoulder, she heard Sasuke's even breathing. For perhaps the millionth time that day, she wished for his courage, for his level-headedness. Even a sliver of it would do wonders for her. There's nothing to fear, Lady Hinata, Neji told her, wafting past her to float in front of the puppet guards. Even if something does come up, you have a guard with you. That was true. Sasuke wouldn't let any harm come to her, she was sure. Squaring her shoulders, she took in a deep breath and stepped towards the doors. Only to stop immediately upon them opening. A short, chestnut-haired woman scuttled out with a rather pleased smile on her face. Which, of course, disappeared upon her wide eyes falling upon Hinata. Moon Witch, she gasped, pushing her hands behind her to slam the doors shut. The walls groaned, but the puppets did not falter. Hinata was sure she had seen her before, somewhere. About the palace, doing this and that, double-checking things to make sure everything was properly prepared. The maid did her job well, and Temari and Kankuro seemed content with her. And yet, somehow, Hinata could not help but feel uncomfortable under her stare. What a surprise. She had a low tone, edged with displeasure. When the maid brushed her hair out of her face, Hinata could see the dark weeds stuck to her forehead. Trying to smile, Hinata greeted her softly. Good morning. Is the, Sand King in? More stickers sprouted as the maid's eyes narrowed. Yes, she said, leaving the door to take a few steps forward, but His Majesty will not be seeing anyone today. With the snap of her fingers, the puppets drew their swords and stepped in front of the doors. I suggest you come, a different day. What? Hinata blinked again, startled. But the sandstorm is tomorrow. I can't. Please. I really must. I'm sorry, I can't help you. With a quick bow, the maid was off, leaving Hinata stuck in her own confusion and turmoil. What just happened? Still stuck a few minutes in the past, Hinata slowly backed away and left the hallway. A hand came to her chest, pressed against her heart, and she couldn't tell if she was overjoyed or disappointed. All she knew was that her time was running out, and if she didn't act soon, all of Temari and Kankuro's efforts in finding and bringing her here would be wasted. Lady Hinata. In front of her, Neji nodded at a window that had yet to be boarded up. She followed his gaze and saw a balcony with unboarded, glass doors that led into the Sand King's rooms. Walking over, she pressed her palms against the glass, searching for any way to open the window. There were a few latches at the top, but even on the tips of her toes, she couldn't reach it. Ah! She turned slightly. Sasuke, could you? He was already there, towering over her, unlatching the window and pulling the pane up. A hot breeze washed in, bits of sand falling inside. I see your plan. Removing his cloak, letting it fall to the floor, Sasuke stepped out of the pool of dark fabric with wings springing from his back. They stretched and spreaded, feathers of pure white, so clean compared to the dust and sand-stained atmosphere of Sand 1. Tell me what you need me to do. Gulping, she turned and pointed at the balcony. I need you to fly me over there. Her eyes darted left and right, making sure no one was about to stop them. Can you do that? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. She knew he could. But, a horrible tremble overtook her body, and despite the sweltering heat, Hinata felt every joint in her body freeze with fear. When we're there, please, don't leave my side. She recalled Suigetsu's warning about not being alone with Gaara, and she had no intentions to ignore it. Her gaze found his covered face, trying to meet his eyes, both hidden and not even for a second. A subtle shift she barely noticed came to him, and then he moved back and wrapped his arms under her own, pulling her close to him. You have my word. And with that, they shot into the air and through the window, leaving her heart behind, beating wildly in that pool of cloth and static. The second her feet touched the sandstone balcony, he let go of her, and she fell to her knees, shivering. The sun's hard glare made her squint, and when she opened her mouth to try and force air into her quaking lungs, sand covered her tongue, and she coughed and gasped and struggled to get on her feet. The wind was brutal and pushing against her left side. Even if she wanted to, she couldn't get up. It was impossible. She had pushed herself too much, and the lack of food in her system made that shake in her limbs all the worse. Come on, Moon Witch. The pushing subsided, and when she looked, she saw Sasuke standing there, blocking the wind. Light, inaudible footfalls came to her, then stopped. Before she knew it, she saw Neji at her eye level, his transparent hand outstretched and waiting for her. It wasn't real, but the gesture was still appreciated. Let's go, Lady Hinata, he said, cool voice gentle and soothing. Gods, she wished he was real. I'll be right here, no matter what. She took that hand, grabbed at the air that made his figmentation, and stood on her wobbly legs, balancing, shifting from right to left until she felt that she could stand properly. The glass door was gleaming, covered in light scrapes from the sand constantly being pushed against it. The wind howled. If you dare show your face to me, I will not stop myself like last time. And tried to rip her cloak away from her, but she pulled it close. Naruto is not here this time. Remember that, and basked in its softness. Sasuke's wings sunk out of view, and she could see the holes in his back. If he didn't get inside soon, they might get infected by the sand. But not a sliver of impatience came to the eye of the man who held his time over anything else, and after a minute, Hinata stepped forward, and he followed her without falter. The chambers of the Sand King looked nothing like hell. In fact, it looked to fit the style of another king Hinata knew, though, of course, she would not dare to say it out loud. But it was a very bright place. The majority of the walls were made of windows with thin, white curtains waltzing in the subtle breeze inside. The floor was rosewood, a rich brown dipped in crimson, that brought color to the drab, off-white walls. Desert plants of different shapes and colors hung from the ceiling and decorated the floors. Not one, Hinata noticed, looked unwatered or uncared for. It reminded her of the gardens in Moon, and that gave her a bit of relief. But then her eyes found the skylight, or rather, the man who bathed in the sunshine dripping from it. Without a moment of doubt, she recognized him. That face. Those eyes. It matched her flashbacks. It matched her hallucination just that morning. That was Gaara. He wasn't facing her. She just barely got a glimpse of his face before he turned away completely to pull on the silk, forest green royal robes he wore. She watched the folds of his back and the swiftness of his fingers working on his sleeves and there was a snake. Beige, at his feet. Sparkling and slithering. It left him and crawled her way. She tried to rub at the sand that had gotten stuck in her eyes, but she couldn't move. Out of fear. Was she still that much of a coward? Or, wait. When she looked down, there were already snakes hanging from her wrists, pulling them down, heavy and sturdy like chains. And then the approaching snake winded up and curled into the air. Preparing. Aiming. The sun caught its eyeless face, and she finally realized that they weren't snakes at all. Wait. It was sand, and at the cry from her mouth, it lunged at her. Black filled her vision, and her nose was pressed against something hard. Electricity filled her nostrils. The buzz of lightning shot through the air. She waited for the sound of spilled blood, expected that smell of burning flesh, but nothing. Just stillness. The sand chains at her wrists dropped and slid away. She could move, though she was unsure if she wanted to. But the stillness stretched on, and her curiosity rose and overpowered any sense of caution. Slowly, she moved to the side, peeking around Sasuke's shoulders. Gaara was still in his spot under the sunlight, now facing them. His red hair thrashed about his face as the wind from the balcony doors blew through the room, moving and shifting and affecting everything inside. Well, almost everything. Because between them and him was what Hinata could only describe as a spill of sand. Like when a bucket of paint was thrown against a canvas, sending it everywhere, leaving nothing untouched. It was like that, only sand, and it was stagnant in the air, curled and folded and looped. Like the cursive words in his letter. Hinata, unconsciously, let out a shaky exhale, and the second his eyes snapped toward her, that spill of sand shrunk back and disappeared somewhere behind him. Sasuke immediately sheathed his katana, and Neji, at her right, gave an airy chuckle. She couldn't understand what he found so funny. They had nearly been. We decided to let ourselves in, Sasuke said, stepping back to stand directly to her left, since you've been a shit host for the past day. Hinata gawked. How can he just say that? She was well aware of his momentary lapses in properly addressing his superiors. How he talked with Naruto was just one of the many occurrences, she was sure. But this wasn't Naruto. Not even close. But either Gaara was not angered by it at all, or he did well in hiding it for some odd reason, for not even the bat of an eye escaped him. Instead, his gaze remained on her, sinking into her skull. His threat replayed over and over in her head, and she inched closer to Sasuke, keeping an eye out for any sand that may try to creep back. As if sensing her fear, Neji shook his head and said, "Look closer." Everything was still a bit blurry, so she rubbed her eyes, finally got the sand out, and looked again. And despite what she had assumed, she found that Gaara presented himself like an open book. Not a hint of anger or violence was in that wide gaze of his. He looked surprised, of course, and a bit on edge, but when she looked at him, she didn't feel in danger. And when her gaze sunk and found the thick mass of stickers on his throat, Hinata instantly put two and two together. "Why, Your Majesty?" Feeling like the atmosphere was safe, she slowly, tentatively stepped forward. One at a time, right foot, then left. It was only 4 steps, but it felt like she had traveled miles. It was hotter over there, near him. Her gills flinched, but Hinata made sure to keep her expression calm as she traced her eyes along his neck, and said, "Does it hurt?" "Your throat." He had very expressive eyes, unlike the dead ones she had imagined before. They swam with wonder as they looked down at her. His right hand rose and rubbed at the tight rope of weeds that were choking the voice out of him. They shifted with his fingers, a few already loosening up. Movement flashed in her peripheral vision, and she snapped her focus on his mouth, which opened and closed without a sound. She watched for a while, concentrated on its movement, and realized. He was mouthing. Ada, her name. And just as those stickers loosened, they tightened once again, and sand wped out from behind him and snapped through the air. She yelped and jumped back as it raced past her and towards the walnut doors. They slammed open from the power behind the sand, and within seconds, puppets were inside, marching toward her. What? Her head snapped to Gaara, who was already on his way to the other side of the room, robe swishing behind him. Why, Your Majesty? Wait. He didn't. Cold, wooden hands grabbed her wrists, yanking her forward, towards the doors. Her body lurched forward, and she winced and tried to pull away. Wait. Her left shoulder bumped into Sasuke as he reached over and ripped the hands off of her, pushing the puppets back to give her space. Walk, he hissed, frustration in his tone, and she wasn't sure to who that was directed. She vaguely felt her legs lead her to the door, but her eyes remained on the back of the Sand King, who stood by his empty desk, avoiding her eye as she was dragged out of his chambers. I don't understand. Scrubbing at her skin with an old, worn sponge, Hinata worked hard to get the sand off of her. A harder task than it sounded, for she found that the stuff was everywhere. Squirting a bit more soap on her arms, she shifted into the bath and focused on her left shoulder, which had a fine layer of sand on it. It hadn't been more than half an hour since her visit to the Sand King, yet her mind would not stop storming. The whole ordeal left her confused and her mouth dry. She had expected him to act on his warning in his letter, but he never did. And yet the moment she found comfort in his presence, he turned cold and kicked her out. Frowning, she dipped her sponge in the water and began to wash the soap off. So does he hate me or not? Her gaze turned away from her washing to momentarily look at her cousin, who sat on the bench where her new set of clothes lay, eyes closed in thought as he tipped his chin back. Does he want to kill me or not? He doesn't. Such a palpable confidence was in that tone that she simply had to believe him. And I don't suppose he hates you, either. But that statement came out a little more weakly. Turning her focus to her gills, being sure to be gentle with the tender skin, Hinata mused to herself. Then why did he kick us out? I'm not sure, Neji said, but there must be a reason. She nodded, gaze falling to the green-tinted waters. You should have seen his throat. It's no wonder he can't speak. I just hope they hadn't permanently damaged his vocal cords. This all seems too coincidental to be real. Finally feeling clean, Hinata stepped out of the tub and began to dry herself with one of the towels. I agree. The sandstorm, the stickers, his letter and her memory loss, it all almost seemed planned. But, how can someone plan my memory loss? She wondered. Or His Majesty losing his voice? Neji opened his eyes, but kept them on the high ceiling as she reached through him to gather her clothes. It's possible. She wasn't sure if she was following. You think so? But you should focus on getting His Majesty's voice back. But how? It was made perfectly clear by him and everyone else that he did not want to see her. How was she supposed to help him when she wasn't even allowed in the same room as him? Now fully clothed, Hinata checked her reflection and adjusted her hood over her face. Her figment dropped his gaze onto her, and he smirked, eyes dancing in the dim candlelight. You're a Hyuga, he mused, standing, drifting to her side, watching both of their reflections. You'll figure it out. You always do. Sasuke. He looked up when she left the bathing room, skin still pink from the warm waters and scrubbing. Do you mind? She trailed off for a moment, trying to find her confidence again. It wasn't so much that talking to him scared her, she was mostly used to him and his silence and pointed words by now. But rather, it was her request that made lead butterflies bounce along the walls of her stomach. She fumbled, and he stood, quiet and waiting. Can we go talk to a few people, please? His right eye narrowed, as if unsure why she would be asking him, but not a hint of protest left him as he settled next to her and, like clockwork, followed her every move. Her first destination was Temari's office, which was on the first floor and on the opposite side of the palace. Hinata had a vague memory of where it was from the tour yesterday, but she still had to ask a maid or two for more specific directions. It was a bit past 2, and the afternoon air was hot and busy. More precautions were being added to the already long list of things to get done before the sandstorm hit, and Hinata secretly wondered if they would be able to get it all done in time. All the windows were properly boarded off, and now the focus was on lowering the chandeliers from the ceiling. Hinata heard whispers of one of them being used as a weapon against Gaara a few years back. He had nearly been crushed by one, and no one was willing to risk it happening again. When they entered an open hall, the sound of crystals clinking together nearly overwhelmed the talk of the room. She saw ropes connected to a rather large and elegant chandelier, which was carefully being lowered to the floor for a few soldiers and puppets to carry into a storage room. It was a rather impressive sight, and Hinata was so distracted by it that, when she eventually looked down from it, she was all turned around and confused again. Blushing, she turned to Sasuke to ask if he knew which direction they should go, but he seemed distracted, staring off to the side at a few of the maids working on lowering the chandelier, and she decided to leave him to it and go ask someone who didn't seem completely busy. To her surprise, she saw the man from yesterday, the one who had accidentally knocked into her. Sasori, she believed his name was. And though he had given her quite a fright before, she didn't want to spend the next 10 minutes lost in the maze of the castle's hallways, so she timidly walked over to him. She piped, hoping she wouldn't startle him. She saw thin strings coming out of his fingers and remembered Konkuro's demonstration. He was working. Hopefully, he was not too busy. Excuse me, sir. The strings vanished, and he turned to her, stone eyes blinking once upon sighting her. Her throat went dry, and she had to suppress a frightened shiver. Do you? Snap. The sound boomed through the room. Sasori's head snapped up, and his jaw clenched before he shot forward and pushed her onto the ground. She had yelped and hissed as her right elbow hit the hard floor at a blunt angle, but that pain was quickly forgotten when a terrible cacophony ricocheted through the room. Glass shattered everywhere around her, a horrible crash sounded just before her, and the room was subjected to darkness. She felt large, warm hands on her shoulders and something hovering over her, and when her moon eyes blinked and adjusted to the dark, she saw Sasuke over her, cursing under his breath, glaring to the side. When she followed his gaze, Hinata saw that the chandelier had fallen a foot or two away from her. One of the metal arms was bent at an awkward angle, stretching out towards her, just barely missing her legs. When she looked down, she saw Sasuke's hands were on either side of her head, bleeding as bits of broken glass sunk into his palm and fingers. Finally, the noise stopped, and Hinata finally allowed herself to breathe.